Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Today it is the casting of Frank Stone, a discussion video. And what I'm asking is, did we miss having a traditional narrator and the Premonitions? It's something that we might have forgotten about, but obviously we are accustomed to Premonitions in Supermassive Games, and there weren't any in the casting of Frank Stone. And while we did have a narrator in Augustine, we didn't have those traditional cutaway scenes like we do with your curators, your Dr. Hills, and your Elizas. So, mate, I'm going to throw it over to you. Do you want to start with maybe the narrator first?
Yeah, I believe that the game benefits from steering away from the traditional format. Reason being is that, let's say for argument's sake that we did get those scenes, and between every chapter we had us sat down in front of Augustine, and they could have done it, like they could have had a lot of cool things they could have done, like had it all Until Dawn style, where we're actually playing as the psycho talking to Dr. Hill, and we could have had it where maybe, the whole time we were playing as Frank Stone, they could have pulled a similar stunt. There's a bunch of stuff you could do and toy about with that could have worked and been really interesting. But I just think, Frank Stone is so different from the other games, and of course, yeah, because of the tie-in with Dead by Daylight, you can't forget that. But I think I'd feel a bit, like it was cheap if we were just sat in front of Augustine every time, and I don't know, she was kind of doing like a psych session for us or something. I feel the game strongly benefits from a pacing point of view as well, that you just go from chapter to chapter, and you don't really see Augustine that much, but every now and then she'll chime in with the backstory about what's happening with Frank Stone. And I feel as well, the other thing to kind of mention as well, lad, is the fact that when we look at the other narrators that we've historically had, right? So I'm talking Eliza, Dr. Hill, and the Curator. Those guys are very much like people in a dark room or in a study or in an office, kind of far away, that we have intervals with, but they're not necessarily tied into the game massively. They are parts of the story, but Dr. Hill is just a guy on the phone who's a therapist. Eliza is a person who's instrumental to the backstory, but we don't see in any locations with the other characters at any given point, really. Augustine's in the game, she plays an instrumental part, whether she introduces them, in the manor, whether she appears at the end when she's kneeled down in front of the entity. And I feel like that's sufficient. I feel like the game benefits from steering away from the traditional format. And yeah, I think they got it spot on, mate. How about yourself? Do you think that we missed a traditional narrator?
No, I'm in complete agreement with you. I think actually it was enough to have every now and then those periodic scenes where Augustine would do a voiceover to talk about the plot. Another thing you got to bear in mind as well is it's overt from the get-go that she's a villain. So sure, they could have had a little cutaway scene with her where maybe you go and see her and you're sat by the campfire or something like that. I think that it's what you were saying there about the pacing. I think it works. I think one of my criticisms of The Quarry, although they sort of neatly tied Eliza in, is that sometimes when you visited Eliza, it was oh, okay, that's it, and then you bugger off again, and you've got the tarot cards if you find them and such, but those scenes didn't land as well, and this is why I think the absolutely marvellous job they did with Dr. Hill. How did they do that after every chapter? Because those scenes were just so good. I don't think it necessarily would have worked for this game. Like I said, I think those little intervals where she's explaining the plot, her plot really, because she's as you say, the instrumental part of the whole scheme. I think it's absolutely fine as is. So it was good as well because it's one of the things that I had in mind before going into the game. Who's the narrator going to be? Which is what you come to expect from a Supermassive game. But actually, we've now played a Supermassive game and it felt like we didn't need one, which I can't work out whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think that overall in Frank Stone it didn't need one.
No, I completely agree, and I feel like if Augustine was to be a traditional narrator where we saw every now and then, I would just think it would be too much of a carbon copy from Until Dawn and The Quarry, and I feel like Frank Stone stands on its own 2 feet very well. And I feel the reason being is because they don't go for the norms. And we're about to talk about Premonitions in a minute as well. But I feel if we were sat opposite opposite Augustine, at the end of every chapter, I just would have yawned a little bit. Like, is this just literally only serving the purpose because this is the format they know and they've stuck to it? And I feel the game does very well just, like, breaking tradition and doing its own thing. And I feel like it was a really welcome change of kind of, like, dynamic.
It would have felt forced, I think, if they did cutaway scenes with Augustine. So I definitely think it was the right call. But obviously the other part of this video, mate, is to do with the premonitions. Now, with Until Dawn, we had the totems, in the quarry, we had the tarot cards, and we've obviously got the pictures in the dark pictures. All things that, again, are staple in Supermassive Games. But we didn't see them in the casting of Frank Stone. How did you feel that we didn't have premonitions?
Again, same argument. I liked it. I feel, the words you said perfectly, it would have felt forced. I feel like Frank Stone gives us plenty of other bits. So it gave us the puzzles and it gave us collectibles. So yeah, we had the timeline stuff. And yeah, I know like in Until Dawn, you get like totems as well and they give you the premonitions. But I feel like, you know, Frank Stone instead gives us relics and trinkets. And I feel like you're not missing going around the map and the levels picking up stuff because you have that, you know. And if you're a Dead by Daylight fan or player like I am, it is like ecstasy to find all the different killers, you know, you can play as in the games that you know and love. I feel like, let's for argument's sake say that you're trying to implement premonitions in. I'm not sure it would work, mate, because obviously a big part of Frank Stone is about timelines, not knowing which timeline you're in, and then like there's a big twist at the end that some of the timelines don't actually match and stuff. And I feel like if you was to shove premonitions in there, it would actually be probably more misleading and confusing. And the game, like, I feel like you finish it on a blind playthrough, you might be a little confused at first, and I feel like you need to do multiple playthroughs to grasp the game. And I feel like if you was to throw premonitions in there, I feel like it could make the picture even murkier than it needed to be. So yeah, I would again argue that Frank Stone did the right call of neglecting premonitions. How about yourself?
And once again, I agree. I think actually if they put premonitions in this, it would have been overkill from a collectible perspective. Because you've got the relics, you've got the trinkets, you've then got 3 separate categories for, you know, clues and such. You put premonitions on top. It's like you said as well. You put that on top, and you're thinking, bloody hell, like you'd be absolutely looking, you'd be exploring all the time, wouldn't you, to look for these things, and it wouldn't necessarily make sense unless the premonition directly related to the timeline that you were in. I think overall, I think this comes back to sort of like the narrator as well. And while I would say it is a Supermassive game in that it was built by Supermassive, right? Having seen interviews and things, we know that it was Behaviour that approached Supermassive because they wanted to take a different angle with Dead by Daylight. They wanted a single player experience and they wanted the best in the business to make their game. So while it's a Supermassive game, it is essentially a Dead by Daylight game. So I think they could afford to take out some of the luxuries like your cutaway scenes with your narrator, like your premonitions, and do the game as more of a homage to, you know, DBD, to try and entice some of those like multiplayer driven players to come in and sort of enjoy like the single player experience. So yeah, I've got to say again, I agree. I don't think that premonitions were necessarily needed, but one little caveat to that, and maybe this is rooted in the fact that I've got a lot of people killed, I do wonder what the impact was. I do wonder, like, you know, if Supermassive have got this database of everyone's playthroughs and, you know, deaths and things, whether not having the premonitions had a much bigger impact on the amount of deaths people experienced. Because, you know me, mate, in these games, I do look and find everything. I'll look at the premonitions. If I see something, I'm then on red alert because I'm thinking, right, here's potentially a scene where someone could die. Because we didn't have that in this game, actually, there was a lot of deaths. So whether how much that come into it, I really don't know, but it'd be interesting to find out. But yeah, I mean, have you got any other pointers, lad? Otherwise we'll wrap up.
Yeah, kind of just to say as well, like, this might be a hot take here, but maybe I'm growing tired of the premonition thing, because we take the devil in me as an example, lad. Now, we had a premonition which massively misled us and led to a character death on both our sides, right? Now, I feel like premonitions are kind of like, they're useful, you know, you look at them, you really study the clip, and you're like, right, maybe I should avoid this and that. I feel like you could argue it kind of distracts you from playing the game, and I quite liked not having to kind of go in the menu every turn up to kind of like study to see what I should avoid. I quite like the pacing of Frank Stone of just playing the game, no pausing. So yeah, like, again, I keep saying this, the phrase, welcome change. I felt, yeah, not having premonitions was a nice little experiment, and I would say it's one that paid off.
Interesting stuff. So there we go, guys. Obviously, that was just a quick little discussion video on like whether we thought that the narrator and the premonitions were missed in the casting of Frank Stone. You've heard mine and Liam's take on it. Do let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and we'll be keen to be reading them. Do stay tuned for more Frank Stone content, and we will see you in the next video.
Bye, guys.